At dawn on June 6, 1944, while most of Hitler's generals slept, one German commander was already awake, staring into the gray Atlantic from a lonely command post on the Normandy coast. Through mist and sea spray he saw shapes on the horizon that should not have been there. Not fishing boats. Not routine patrols. An armada. He reached for the telephone. The line crackled. Orders demanded confirmation. Superiors hesitated. The weather reports said invasion was impossible. The Führer was asleep. No one wanted to be wrong. But this commander knew the truth. By the time permission came, the beaches were already burning. This is the story of the man who saw D-Day first, and why seeing it did not mean stopping it. The night of June 5, 1944, arrived quietly along the Normandy coast. The Atlantic did not roar. It breathed, slow, heavy, indifferent. Low clouds slid across the moon, shredding its light into pale fragments that drifted over concrete bunkers, steel obstacles, and darkened gun emplacements. The sea smelled of salt, diesel residue, and rot from weeks of storms. Wind rattled loose boards and hummed through barbed wire like a distant, restless whisper. Inside a coastal command post overlooking the English Channel, a German commander sat awake when he should not have been. Most of his peers were gone. Some were in Paris attending war games. Others were home on leave. Many believed, because Berlin believed, that no invasion would come tonight. The weather had been declared unsuitable. The channel was rough. Allied aircraft activity had dropped. Reports pointed elsewhere, Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. Always Pas-de-Calais. But this commander did not trust the calm. He had learned long ago that war rarely announced itself with noise. It arrived quietly first, through small inconsistencies, subtle absences, things that did not align with official expectations. His name would never become famous. No statues would bear his likeness. History would not argue about his genius or condemn him as a villain in bold type. He was not Rommel. He was not Rundstedt. He was not a man whose decisions could change the course of nations. He was something far more dangerous to an army built on certainty and hierarchy. He was paying attention. A coast that was not meant to hold. Normandy was not supposed to matter. The German High Command had spent years preparing for an Allied invasion of Western Europe, yet their focus had narrowed with almost obsessive certainty. Geography, logistics, and intelligence all seemed to point toward a single conclusion. When the Allies came, they would land at the shortest crossing point between Britain and France. Pas-de-Calais. It was closer. It had ports. It made sense. Normandy, by contrast, was rugged, unpredictable, and poorly suited for a massive amphibious assault, or so the planners believed. Its beaches were long but exposed. Its tides were treacherous. Its inland terrain was tangled with hedgerows that favored defense but complicated supply lines. To the Germans, Normandy was a flank. Important, yes, but not decisive. And so it was manned accordingly. The commander knew this. He also knew that logic was not always the enemy's guiding principle. The Allies had shown again and again that they were willing to gamble on complexity if it produced surprise. That knowledge sat heavy in his mind as he studied the darkness beyond his observation slit. The problem with weather reports. Earlier that evening, the official meteorological summary had reached his desk. Poor visibility. Strong winds. High seas. The report concluded with confidence. Large-scale amphibious operations improbable. Most officers would have closed the folder at that point. The German military was built on obedience to data, authority, and procedure. To question a report was not merely inconvenient, it was insubordinate. But the commander had served long enough to know how often certainty failed at the edges. Weather forecasts, especially over the Channel, were educated guesses at best. And something about tonight felt wrong, not violent enough to be dangerous, not calm enough to be reassuring. The sea was restless but not chaotic. The wind sharp but manageable. He remembered stories from earlier in the war. Allied raids carried out under worse conditions, precisely because German commanders believed the weather would keep them safe. The enemy learns, he thought. We repeat. Signals in the static. Shortly after midnight, reports began filtering in. Radar stations along the coast picked up intermittent contacts. Nothing definitive, nothing solid enough to justify alarm. Some operators blamed interference. Others reported ghost echoes. Aircraft sightings came and went, scattered and inconsistent. Paratroopers were rumored inland, but such reports had surfaced before, usually explained away as exercises or resistance activity. The commander listened. He did not react yet. False alarms were common. The Allies had spent months saturating German intelligence with deception, Dummy landings, fake radio traffic, phantom armies commanded by fictional generals. Every warning risked being part of the performance. But deception worked best when defenders stopped trusting their own eyes. At approximately 2 o'clock, a junior officer entered the command post, hesitant. "Herr Commandant," he said, "the Naval Observation Team reports unusual movement west-northwest. Multiple silhouettes. Low profile." "How many?" the commander asked. "We cannot say. The horizon is crowded." Crowded. That word lingered, the first shapes. The commander stepped outside. The air was cold, damp, metallic. His boots crunched against gravel as he climbed the short ladder to the observation platform. He raised binoculars that had seen too many quiet nights and pressed them to his eyes. At first he saw nothing. Then, movement. Dark smudges against darker water. Lines where there should have been empty sea. Shapes that did not match waves, nor reflections, nor fishing vessels. He adjusted focus. The horizon was alive. Not a fleet in parade formation, not yet. It was disorderly, spreading, vast. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of shapes moved with grim inevitability toward the coast. Landing craft, transport ships, escort vessels, an invasion force unfolding in real time. For a long moment, the commander said nothing. This was the instant history rarely records accurately, the space between seeing and acting, when disbelief wrestles with certainty. He had expected this moment in theory. In practice it felt unreal. The invasion had begun. The weight of the telephone. Inside the bunker, the telephone waited. He knew what would happen when he lifted the receiver. He would report a sighting that contradicted weather forecasts, strategic assumptions, and months of intelligence consensus. He would challenge not just his immediate superiors, but the entire architecture of German planning. And if he was wrong, even slightly wrong, his career would end. Possibly worse. The German command system did not reward initiative unless it succeeded spectacularly. Failure carried consequences far beyond embarrassment. Still he picked up the phone. His report was precise. Calm. Professional. Multiple naval units approaching the Normandy coast. Large scale. Estimated invasion force. There was a pause on the other end. Then questions. "Are you certain? Could this be a diversion? Have you confirmed the silhouettes? What about the weather assessment?" He answered each carefully, resisting the urge to exaggerate. Exaggeration was the quickest way to be dismissed. "Yes. No. Yes. The weather is improving." Another pause. Higher command requested confirmation from other sectors. Time passed. Outside the shapes grew larger. Bureaucracy at dawn. The German defensive system was formidable on paper. Concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, artillery, obstacles designed to tear landing craft apart. But it depended on timing. Panzer divisions were held inland, controlled at the highest levels. They could not move without explicit authorization. Coastal units were strong enough to delay, but not to stop, an invasion on their own. The commander knew this. He also knew that every minute lost arguing over procedure translated into Allied boots on sand. By 3:30, reports from other observation posts began to align with his own. Paratroopers were confirmed inland. Naval gunfire flickered on the horizon. The sea itself seemed to glow faintly from distant muzzle flashes. Still, the response from above was hesitant. Hitler slept. And no one wanted to wake him. This was not metaphorical. German command authority was so centralized that launching a counterattack without approval from the top risked accusations of disobedience or treason. So the invasion advanced while permission crawled. Knowing without power. As dawn approached, the commander watched the coast transform. The sea filled with movement. The sky buzzed with aircraft. Distant explosions rolled like thunder trapped beneath the earth. He could see individual landing craft now. He could see wakes. He could see soldiers packed tightly, weapons clutched, faces hidden by helmets and fear. He could do nothing but report. This was the cruelest role war assigned. The witness who understands first but commands least. He had done his duty. He had seen. He had warned. History would later ask why Germany failed to repel the invasion. It would cite strategy, resources, leadership failures, and Allied brilliance. But it would rarely mention this commander, standing on a cold platform, watching the war turn while waiting for someone else's permission to respond. When the first Allied shell struck the coast, he did not flinch. He already knew the truth. D-Day had begun, not when the beaches were stormed, but hours earlier, when one man looked through binoculars and realized that the assumptions of an empire had just collapsed. By the time the sky began to pale over the English Channel, the commander no longer needed binoculars. The invasion was undeniable now, audible, visible, irreversible. The sea itself seemed to move with purpose. Gray water churned under the weight of thousands of vessels, their engines growling in overlapping rhythms that carried across the coast like a mechanical heartbeat. Searchlights swept the horizon in nervous arcs, briefly illuminating the silhouettes of ships before snapping away, as if afraid of what they revealed. The commander stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, watching the future arrive. Dawn without illusion. At approximately 4:30, naval gunfire began in earnest. The first shells screamed overhead with a sound unlike anything else in war, a tearing howl that ended in concussive thunder as concrete bunkers shuddered and earth leapt skyward. Shockwaves rippled through the command post. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin, steady curtains. Phones rang. Messengers ran. Reports collided with each other in fragments. Enemy aircraft everywhere. Paratroopers confirmed near the Vire River. Naval bombardment intensifying. Communications with forward bunkers intermittent. The commander absorbed it all, issuing orders where he could. Minor redeployments, alerts, defensive preparations. But he knew the truth. These were gestures, not solutions. The decisive forces, the armored divisions, were still immobile, waiting on authorization that crawled up the chain of command toward a man who slept hundreds of kilometers away. In the gray half-light of dawn, German coastal defenses opened fire. Machine guns stitched the water. Artillery thundered from hidden positions. Some landing craft exploded, torn open before reaching shore. Men fell into the surf under the weight of their equipment, disappearing beneath waves already darkened with oil and blood. For brief moments, it looked as though the defenses might hold. Then the Allied firepower answered. Fire from the sea. Battleships offshore adjusted their aim. What followed was not a duel. It was an execution. Naval guns, calibrated with brutal precision, hammered known German positions. Concrete that had taken months to pour fractured in seconds. Bunkers designed to withstand direct hits collapsed under repeated impacts. Gun crews vanished in fire and debris before they could reload. The commander watched through periscope slits and shattered embrasures as entire sections of coastline were rewritten by force. He felt no hatred for the men advancing through the smoke. Only a professional recognition of overwhelming superiority. This was not a raid. This was the main effort. Reports no one wanted. By 6 o'clock, the commander's situation reports had grown increasingly urgent. He no longer spoke in cautious estimates. He stated facts. Enemy forces landing in strength. Multiple beachheads established. Resistance severe but insufficient. Immediate armored counterattack required. The replies when they came were maddeningly restrained. Higher headquarters acknowledged receipt. They requested further confirmation. They asked whether this might still be a diversion designed to draw forces away from Pas-de-Calais. The commander nearly laughed. A diversion did not land tens of thousands of men under full naval and air cover. A diversion did not shatter coastal fortifications with battleship guns. A diversion did not seize villages inland before sunrise. Yet the illusion persisted, sustained by months of Allied deception and the German command's own rigidity. Even now, as the beaches burned, many senior officers believed the true invasion had yet to come. The prisoner of certainty. This was the paradox of German military excellence. The Wehrmacht prized discipline, planning, and adherence to doctrine. These qualities had brought early victories across Europe. But by 1944 they had hardened into something brittle. Initiative existed, but only within narrow, predefined boundaries. The commander understood that reality intimately. He had risen not by brilliance but by reliability. He knew which risks were tolerated and which were punished. Calling the invasion early had already placed him in a precarious position. Pressing further, ordering movements beyond his authority, would cross a line. So he waited and watched. The beaches earned their names. As the morning progressed, the Allied landings intensified. The commander received fragmented intelligence from different sectors, each with its own grim narrative. On one beach, American forces advanced under murderous fire, pinned against the waterline for hours before breaking through by sheer persistence and small unit leadership. On another, British units pushed inland faster than expected, overcoming strong points with coordinated infantry and armor. Elsewhere, Canadian troops fought through towns the Germans had assumed would hold all day, and did not. The beaches acquired names that would echo through history. To the commander, they were simply coordinates, positions where the line was failing. He tracked each collapse on a large, worn map pinned to the bunker wall. Red pencil marks crept inland. Defensive sectors that were supposed to delay the enemy for days fell in hours. Every mark represented men he had spoken to, units he had inspected, positions he had trusted. None of it mattered against this scale of force. The air above, the silence below. By late morning, the Luftwaffe was effectively absent. Allied fighters dominated the skies, strafing roads, railways, and any movement that dared reveal itself. Columns attempting to reinforce the coast were shredded before they reached the front. The commander understood air superiority well enough to know what this meant. German mobility was dead. Even if the panzer divisions were released now, their approach would be slow, visible, and costly. Fuel shortages, bombed bridges, and constant air attack would turn any counterattack into a gamble with terrible odds. Still, a gamble was better than paralysis. He pressed the issue again. Permission finally. Sometime after midday, authorization arrived. Panzer units were released. The message was terse, belated, and devastatingly insufficient. By the time armored formations began to move, Allied troops had already pushed inland, secured key crossroads, and established supply lines that poured men and material onto French soil in endless streams. The commander watched the map and felt a cold, professional despair. This was no longer a question of stopping the invasion. It was about slowing it. The counterattack that could not win. German armor did engage. In isolated, violent clashes, tanks surged forward, striking Allied spearheads with characteristic ferocity. In some areas they achieved local success, forcing brief withdrawals and inflicting losses. But these victories were tactical, not strategic. Every German advance drew immediate Allied air response. Fighter bombers descended with ruthless efficiency, turning roads into graveyards of twisted steel and burning fuel. Coordination broke down. Communications failed. Units fought bravely and alone. The commander followed these reports with grim detachment. He had hoped for more. He had expected less. Seeing the end in the beginning. By evening, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Allied beachheads had merged in places. Supplies flowed uninterrupted. Engineers cleared obstacles. Artillery came ashore. Temporary airstrips were carved from fields that had known only cattle days before. The commander stepped outside once more. The sea that had delivered the invasion now shimmered with reflected firelight. Ships still arrived, still unloaded, still expanded the Allied presence. He thought back to the night before, to the quiet, to the moment when the horizon first seemed crowded. He had seen this coming. And yet, seeing had changed nothing. The burden of the first witness. In the days that followed, the commander's role diminished. The front moved inland away from his sector. His reports became less urgent than routine. Eventually he was reassigned, absorbed into the vast machinery of retreat that defined Germany's final year of the war. No commendation followed his early warning. No reprimand came either. History passed over him, uninterested in men who noticed the truth too soon but lacked the power to act on it. Yet the invasion's success hinged on precisely this failure, the gap between observation and action, between intelligence and authority. D-Day succeeded not only because of Allied courage and planning, but because the German system could not respond fast enough to its own eyes. The commander had seen the invasion first. But in war, seeing is not the same as stopping. The war did not end that day. It only began to end. For the German commander, D-Day was not a single moment frozen in time, but the dividing line between certainty and collapse, a point after which nothing he had believed about control, planning, or obedience held the same meaning. In the weeks that followed June 6, 1944, the Allied advance crawled, then surged, then broke through. Normandy became a battlefield of hedgerows and blood, of villages reduced to rubble, of soldiers fighting at arm's length through fields that swallowed tanks and men alike. The commander heard about it all through reports and rumors, his own role shrinking as the front moved beyond his reach. He had done his job. That knowledge did not bring comfort. The quiet after seeing too much. Long after the beaches fell silent, the commander replayed that first sight in his mind. The horizon. The shapes. The certainty. War was filled with moments of confusion, chaos mistaken for clarity, fear mistaken for courage. But that night had been different. There had been no ambiguity once he truly looked. The invasion had announced itself plainly to anyone willing to accept what they were seeing. And yet acceptance had not been enough. The German war effort did not fail on the beaches alone. It failed in rooms far from the surf, where telephones went unanswered, decisions were deferred, and authority was hoarded rather than delegated. The commander had encountered the limits of his profession not under fire, but under procedure. Responsibility without power. In post-war accounts, historians would dissect D-Day with surgical precision. They would debate weather windows, deception operations, leadership failures, and tactical decisions. They would name generals and presidents, trace arrows across maps, and assign blame with the confidence of hindsight. Rarely would they ask what it felt like to be the first man to understand, and the least able to respond. The commander carried that burden alone. He had spoken when speaking was risky. He had reported what contradicted doctrine. He had fulfilled his obligation to truth as best he could within the system he served. But responsibility without authority is a particular kind of torment. It leaves no clear enemy to blame, no decisive action to regret. Only the knowledge that timing, not courage or intelligence, was the missing weapon. The system that could not flex. The German military prided itself on order. On chains of command so precise they could be diagrammed like machines. For years, that rigidity had delivered results. By 1944, it delivered paralysis. The invasion of Normandy exposed what years of battlefield success had concealed, a command structure incapable of rapid adaptation when reality violated expectation. The commander had seen this flaw long before the first Allied soldiers stepped onto French sand. He had sensed it in the confidence of weather reports, in the certainty with which higher command dismissed Normandy as secondary, in the unwillingness to imagine that the enemy might choose difficulty over convenience. D-Day did not surprise Germany because it was brilliant. It surprised Germany because surprise had been declared impossible. Memory is selective. After the war, names were sorted. Heroes were elevated. Villains were condemned. Complex men were flattened into symbols that fit neatly into textbooks and documentaries. The commander became none of these things. He survived the war as many did, into a world that had little use for his story. There were no trials for men who had merely followed procedure. There were no medals for those whose warnings arrived too early to matter. In civilian life, he rarely spoke of the night he saw the invasion first. Not because it was classified, but because it was misunderstood. People wanted drama. He offered process. They wanted decisive action. He had experienced decisive delay. It was not a story that made sense to those who believed history turned on bold individuals alone. The nature of failure. Failure is often imagined as incompetence or cowardice. D-Day revealed a more dangerous kind. Failure of imagination. Failure of trust. Failure to act when evidence contradicts belief. The German commander was not the only man who saw the invasion coming. Radar operators, sentries, junior officers, all glimpsed pieces of the truth. But truth dispersed across a rigid system does not accumulate into action. It dissipates. By the time the invasion was officially acknowledged, it no longer needed acknowledgement. It had already reshaped the war. Seeing is not enough. There is a temptation to believe that awareness alone changes outcomes, that if only the right person notices the truth in time, disaster can be avoided. D-Day challenges that comforting idea. The commander noticed. He reported. He persisted. And still the invasion succeeded. Because war, like history, is not governed by observation. It is governed by decision, and decision requires authority, courage, and timing aligned in the same instant. On June 6, 1944, those elements never aligned for Germany. The first morning of the end. When historians mark the beginning of the end of the Third Reich, many point to Normandy. They are correct, but not for the reasons often given. Germany did not lose the war because its soldiers lacked skill, nor because its defenses were weak, nor because its commanders were blind. It lost because it saw too late, decided too slowly, and trusted certainty over evidence. The German commander on the Normandy coast understood this before the sun rose. He watched the invasion unfold not as a surprise, but as a confirmation, proof that wars are decided as much by how institutions respond to inconvenient truths as by how armies fight. What remains? Today the beaches of Normandy are quiet. Tourists walk where soldiers once died. The sea rolls in gently, betraying nothing of the violence it carried ashore. Concrete bunkers stand broken, monuments to a confidence that outlived its usefulness. Somewhere among the thousands of forgotten officers, the memory of one commander remains, a man who saw history arriving before it was ready to be believed. He did not change the outcome, but his story reveals something more unsettling than heroism or failure. It shows that sometimes, the most important moment in history is not when the first shot is fired, but when someone sees it coming and no one listens. That was D-Day's first warning. And it went unheard.